Chapter 57. A line of icy cold shot across Thomas's skin as he entered the griever hole, starting from his toes and continuing up his whole body as if he'd jumped through a flat plane of freezing water. The world went even darker around him as his feet thumped to a landing on a slippery surface, then shot out from under him. He fell backward into Teresa's arms. She and Chuck helped him stand. It was a miracle Thomas hadn't stabbed someone's eye out with his spear. The griever hole would have been pitch black if not for the beam of Teresa's flashlight cutting through the darkness. As Thomas got his bearings, he realized they were standing in a 10-foot high stone cylinder. It was damp and covered in shiny, grimy oil, and it stretched out in front of them for dozens of yards before it faded into darkness. Thomas peered up at the hole through which they'd come. It looked like a square window into a deep, starless space. The computer's over there, Teresa said, grabbing his attention. Several feet down the tunnel, she had aimed her light at a small square of grimy glass that shone a dull green color. Beneath it, a keyboard was set into the wall, angling out enough for someone to type on it with ease if standing. There it was, ready for the code. Thomas couldn't help thinking it seemed too easy, too good to be true. Put the words in, Chuck yelled, slapping Thomas on the shoulder. Hurry. Thomas motioned for Teresa to do it. Chuck and I'll keep watch, make sure a griever doesn't come through the hole. He just hoped the gladers had turned their attention from making the aisle and the maze to keeping the creatures away from the cliff. Okay, Teresa said. Wait, Thomas called to her mind. Are you sure you know the words? She turned to him and scowled. I'm not an idiot, Tom. Yes, I'm perfectly capable of remembering. A loud bang from above and behind them cut her off, made Thomas jump. He spun around to see a griever plop through the griever hole, appearing as if by magic from the dark square of black. The thing had retracted its spikes and arms to enter. When it landed with a squishy thump, a dozen sharp and nasty objects popped back out, looking deadlier than ever. Thomas pushed Chuck behind him and faced the creature, holding out his spear as if that would ward it off. Just keep typing, Teresa. A skinny metallic rod burst out of the griever's moist skin, unfolding into a long appendage with 3 spinning blades, which moved directly toward Thomas's face. He gripped the end of his spear with both hands, squeezing tightly as he lowered the knife-laced point to the ground in front of him. The bladed arm moved within 2 feet, ready to slice his skin to bits. When it was just a foot away, Thomas tensed his muscles and swung the spear up, around, and toward the ceiling. It smacked the metal arm and pivoted the thing skyward. The monster let out an angry shriek and pulled back several feet. Thomas heaved breaths in and out. Maybe I can hold it off, he said quickly to Teresa. Just hurry. I'm almost done, she replied. The griever's spikes appeared again. It surged ahead, and another arm popped out of its skin and shot forward, this one with huge claws snapping to grab the spear. Thomas swung, this time from above his head, throwing every bit of strength into the attack. The spear crashed into the base of the claws. With a loud clunk and then a squishing sound, the entire arm ripped free of its socket, falling to the floor. Then, some kind of mouth that Thomas couldn't see. The griever let out a long, piercing shriek and pulled back again. These things are beatable, Thomas shouted. It won't let me enter the last word, Teresa said in his mind. Barely hearing her, not quite understanding, he yelled at a roar and charged ahead to take advantage of the griever's moment of weakness. Swinging his spear wildly, he jumped on top of the creature's bulbous body, whacking 2 metal arms away from him with a loud crack. He lifted the spear above his head, braced his feet, felt them sink into the disgusting blubber, then thrust the spear down and into the monster. A slimy yellow goo exploded from the flesh, splashing over Thomas's legs as he drove the spear as far as it would sink into the thing's body. Then he released the hilt of the weapon and jumped away, running back to Chuck and Teresa. Thomas watched in sick fascination as the griever twitched uncontrollably, spewing the yellow oil in every direction. Spikes popped in and out of the skin. Its remaining arms swung around in mass confusion, at times impaling its own body. Soon it began to slow, losing energy with every ounce of blood or fuel it lost. A few seconds later, it stopped moving altogether. Thomas couldn't believe it. He absolutely couldn't believe it. He just defeated a griever. He glanced behind him at Chuck, standing there with wide eyes. You killed it, the boy said. He laughed. Wasn't so hard, Thomas muttered. He knew immediately that something was wrong when he turned to see Teresa typing frantically at the keyboard. What's the problem? He asked, almost shouting. He ran up to look over his shoulder and saw that she kept typing the word push over and over, but nothing appeared on the screen. She pointed at the dirty square of glass, empty but for its greenish glow of life. I put in all the words, and one by one they appeared on the screen, Then something beeped and they'd disappear. But it won't let me type in the last word. Nothing's happening. Cold filled Thomas's veins. Well, why? I don't know. She tried again and again. Nothing appeared. Thomas! Chuck screamed from behind them. Thomas turned to see him pointing at the griever hole. Another creature was making its way through. As he watched, it plopped down on top of its dead brother, and another griever started entering the hole. What's taking so long? Chuck cried frantically. You said they'd turn off when you punched in the code. Both grievers had righted themselves and extended their spikes, had started moving toward them. It won't let us enter the word push, Thomas said absently, not really speaking to Chuck, but trying to think of a solution. I don't get it, Teresa said. Grievers were coming, only a few feet away. Feeling his will fade into blackness, Thomas braced his feet and held up his fist half-heartedly. It was supposed to work. The code was supposed to. Maybe you should just push that button, Chuck said. Thomas was so surprised by the random statement that he turned away from the grievers and looked at the boy. Chuck was pointing at a spot near the floor, right underneath the screen and keyboard. Before he could move, Teresa was already down there, crouching on her knees. And consumed by curiosity, by a fleeting hope, Thomas joined her, collapsing to the ground to get a better look. He heard the griever moan and roar behind him, felt a sharp claw grab his shirt, felt a prick of pain, but he could only stare. A small red button was set into the wall only a few inches above the floor. 3 black words were printed there, so obvious he couldn't believe he'd missed it earlier. Kill the maze. More pain snapped Thomas out of his stupor. The griever had grabbed him with 2 instruments, had started dragging him backward. The other one had gone after Chuck and was just about to swipe at the kid with a long blade. A button. Push, Thomas screamed, louder than he thought possible for a human being to. And Teresa did. She pushed the button. Everything went perfectly silent. Then, from somewhere down the dark tunnel, came the sound of a door sliding open. Chapter 58. Almost at once, the grievers had shut down completely, their instruments sucked back through their blubbery skin, their lights turned off, their inside machines dead quiet, and that door. Thomas fell to the floor after being released by his captor's claws, and despite the pain of several lacerations across his back and shoulders, elation surged through him so strongly he didn't know how to react. He gasped, then laughed, then choked on a sob before laughing again. Chuck had scooted away from the grievers, bumping into Teresa. She held him tightly, squeezing him in a fierce hug. You did it, Chuck, Teresa said. We were so worried about the stupid code words, we didn't think to look around for something to push. The last word, the last piece of the puzzle. Thomas laughed again, in disbelief that such a thing could be possible so soon after what they'd gone through. She's right, Chuck. You saved us, man. I told you we needed you. Thomas scrambled to his feet and joined the other 2 in a group hug. Chuck's a shuckin' hero. What about the others? Teresa said. Thomas felt his elation wither, and he stepped back and turned toward the hole. As if in answer to her question, someone fell through the black square. It was Minho, looking as if he'd been scratched or stabbed on 90% of his body. Minho, Thomas shouted, filled with relief. Are you okay? What about everybody else? Minho stumbled toward the curved wall of the tunnel, then leaned there, gulping big breaths. We lost a ton of people. It's a mess of blood up there. Then they all just shut down. He paused, taking in a really deep breath and letting it go in a rush of air. You did it. I can't believe it actually worked. Newt came through then, followed by Frypan, then Winston and others. Before long, 18 boys had joined Thomas and his friends in the tunnel, making a total of 21 gladers in all. Every last one of those who'd stayed behind and fought was covered in griever sludge and human blood, their clothes ripped to shreds. The rest, Thomas asked. Half of us, Newt said. Dead. No one said a word then. No one said a word for a very long time. You know what, Minho said. Half might have died, but half of us shucking lived, and nobody got stung, just like Thomas thought. We've got to get out of here. Too many, Thomas thought. His joy dribbled away, turning into a deep mourning for the 20 people who'd lost their lives. Despite the alternative, despite knowing that if they hadn't tried to escape, all of them might have died, it still hurt, even though he hadn't known them very well. Such a display of death, how could it be considered a victory? Let's get out of here, Newt said, right now. Where do we go? Minho asked. Thomas pointed down the long tunnel. I heard the door open down that way. He tried to push away the ache of it all, the horrors of the battle they'd just won, the losses. He pushed it away, knowing they were nowhere near safe yet. Well, let's go, Minho answered, and the older boy turned and started walking up the tunnel without waiting for a response. Newt nodded, ushering the other gladers past him to follow. One by one they went until only he remained with Thomas and Teresa. I'll go last, Thomas said.